how many accounts do I have left today from 5 years ago? That's going to give you the most transparency, and it's also going to give you an estimate of the lifetime or the life of a customer.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines to those that are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And might I add, we have a new building with a new sign. I was over there this morning. It looks amazing. I'm not bragging, but if you have not been by, we will welcome you to Raleigh, North Carolina. Come take a look at it. And with me is Florida's favorite resident, might I add, Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning, give our sponsors a little love, talk about our peer groups and our topic and our most special guest?
I would love to. There you go. There are your eyes. You had that brimmed hat on. I couldn't see.
That's right. Yes, because I know you want to look at my eyes this morning.
Well,
sure.
First thing in the morning, and I thought you were just trying to, fit in with the younger generation or whatnot. But anyway, my name is Dan Gordon. I company is PCO Bookkeepers and M&A Specialists. We do outsourced CFO work and exit planning for pest control and lawn care companies, and that's what we do. And if you're interested in marketing, all things marketing, that would be Coalmarch by WorkWave, and their website is coalmarch.com. And if you need pest control insurance, which I'm getting a lot of inquiries, the insurance market is totally topsy-turvy. And
Topsy-turvy?
Topsy-turvy.
Okay. All right.
So, anyway,
we'll go with it.
Yeah, we'll go with it. So it's problematic, right? So anyway,
Yes.
if you these guys are specialize in pest control, and it's PestWorld.com. And our good friend Todd Burke is the guy there who runs the thing, right?
I got to pause you real quick. We're going to have PestSure on because this is a hot topic that you're talking about is insurance. And again, we got a whole episode we're going to talk about here. But I mean, if you're listening to this and you're like, my gosh, what's going on with my insurance? You're not alone. The last peer group that Dan and I were in, this was a big topic. And it was not even on the agenda. It was just kind of someone randomly said it, and then a fight broke out. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that bad, but it's like a bar fight. But there is absolutely some challenges going on in the insurance market, specifically auto, which we'll bring Todd in. We'll talk about that later. So anyway, continue.
As long as you want to keep interrupting me.
Well, I will say this for our sponsor in the end. What most people came away with is that, we need to be lining up with PestSure, a really industry specific company because of the challenges that are happening and what the options are. So it was a long way of saying, if you've not checked out PestSure, I would highly recommend you do that. I am absolutely a client. I've used PestSure for years. And the reason I use them is because they understand my business. They understand who we are. I'm not worried about them not coming through because of some exclusion or write out on, page 136, subsection C, part 2, right? That's what I'm worried about.
Anyway. By the way, that wasn't just a random thought that Donnie had. So,
Yeah, there you go. Keep going.
All right. So anyway, this diversion started with peer groups. So if you're interested in a peer group, which will divert your attention, actually, peer groups are outstanding and they're pretty cool. We've been doing them for 10, 15 years. And so if you're interested in joining a PMP Industry Insider peer group, please visit pmpindustryinsider.com/peer groups, or go back and listen to episode 136 for more information, where we interview, or where David Billingsley, our facilitator, is on the is on that episode, and we explain it more. Peer groups, we've got several of them going, and it's all thanks to this podcast. So thank you very much for those who participate. Mm-hmm. All right. Today's topic. Today we are talking about whether you are a buyer or a seller, the critical role of due diligence in pest control mergers and acquisitions. Okay, so in case you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard that M&A is a big thing. You also probably heard that the internet's going to catch on at some point too, right? So
Oh, is this where we're starting?
Yes, yes. So for that matter, a very big thing. So NPMA asked me, along with two other brokers, to do a session at PestWorld, and it was moderated by John Myers from Rent-A-Kill. Confession here, we're actually recording this before that session. So when I say that, we did it, we're going to be doing it. The premise is talking about the types of buyers out there, be it strategic. So a lot of people talk about these strategics. What is a strategic? That's a company well entrenched in the industry. It could be Rollins, it could be Rent-A-Kill, it could be Massey, it could be Arrow. Those are strategics, right? Also, from investors like PE firms, family offices, people with pools of money who want to take a position in our great industry, right? So that the discussion revolved around what does the market look like for both strategics and for pools of money or PE, and also what does the due diligence process look like to get a deal done, right? Mm-hmm. And so the discussion panel was excellent, or will be excellent, with much of it revolving around due diligence. So I wanted to take today to talk about what I thought really resonated with the crowd in the room for those who didn't attend. So let's jump in, okay? And by the way, a point is that you may not be selling, but you may come across, somebody in your market that you want to buy. Maybe it's a single route. And I can't tell you how many times I see people, well, we're going to buy this company. We're going to buy a single route. We're going to buy two routes. And that's fine. But there should be a level of diligence before you plunk down a bunch of money or sign a note, to pay the owner. And so let's jump in. Okay. So what is due?
I'm in. Yes. Okay. Yes. Well, let's. Can we talk in generalities here before we get going?
Big generalities.
Okay. So first thing is my personal goal for all of our listeners out there is that I promise you, despite the years of struggle, trials, and efforts, I'm going to teach Dan that it is a / whenever we do a website, and we go not a /. So that's the first thing. Second thing is. Just giving him a hard time.
Wait. By the way, just so that you know where that error occurred, in case anybody was looking, it's when I did the peer group, pmpindustryinsider.com. It should be / peer
Yes. Group. I just have visions of folks out there like, why the hell isn't this working? And Dan's laughing. Anyway, so second thing is, yes, this is a topic that is, oh my gosh. I will tell you, listen, this is going to be a fun episode because Dan obviously is going to be much more polished and thoughtful in what he says. I'm going to tell you what it feels like from the owner, from a buyer and a seller perspective, because I've done both. And I don't have any, concerns about someone smacking me over the top of the head by what I say.
So what you're saying is that sometimes it's painful. It's like a trip to the proctologist.
It is. I think I would rather sit at home and drill screws through my toenails than doing due diligence. It is terrible. So
not always, but go ahead.
Well, I will say as an owner,
depends on who you're doing it with.
Yes, as an owner, this is the hardest part of any deal. This is where things get sideways. Of course, it's the biggest part of the deal. And I've had good experiences in going through this process. I've had bad experiences. I've had deals that have, no problems at all. I've had some deals that, we got all the way to the threshold of death and somehow we revived it and saved it. I had deals that had died, right? I mean, so in diligence.
See, that's the problem with you. You look at it as the threshold of death. I look at it as the altar of marriage.
That is a problem. So let's talk about due diligence. What is it? Let's start there, Dan. So let's just talk through big picture. What's the purpose of due diligence?
Okay, so you're going to buy a pest control company. You're going to sell a pest control company. And the whole process starts out with giving the potential buyer some information, whether you're the buyer or the seller. You're going to give them information. If you do it unrepresented, you might just give them a P&L and a balance sheet and a few other items. If you're going to use somebody like us, we're going to put together a dossier that we're going to send over with all kinds of stuff. But whatever you give them, they're going to use that to create a letter of intent. And that letter of intent is going to be the offer, right? So here's how much money, here's how we're going to pay it. And it's going to have all of these representations that and warranties that you make. Like if you say your company's doing $5 million, we're going to check to make sure that it's doing $5 million, right? So everything in the letter of intent that's laid out is based upon the information that you've provided without verification. Now it's verification time.
So let me pause you there. Let me pause you there because there's a lot that's just there's a lot loaded into, and there's what I would consider to be some pro tips in there as well. First thing, let's talk about if you are a buyer. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of a story, because as you're talking about it, I've got stories just firing along in my. So my little son, Blake, who's now 15 and who can smoke me in running. Back when he was smaller, I could smoke him. So here we are. He's 8 years old.
Here you are, the father and son smoking.
Yeah. Yes. We're smoking. And I take him out to a 5K. We used to sponsor a 5K for a good friend of mine. And it's a long story, but anyway, Triangle support, we sponsored this 5K. So we're out running. We got free tickets and he's like 8. And I'm trying to get my boy to go out and run. So we're out running. Mile 1, total meltdown. I mean, just like he's done. I'm like, no, dude, we gotta keep it going. We gotta keep running. So he's running so fast. I'm walking, keeping up with him, but he's running, right? He's not quitting. And so he's in the hurt locker mile 2, almost all of mile 3. We get to the last half mile. I'm like, all right, dude, let's turn it on. And he turns it on. We get to the last 100 yards and I'm like, take it home. And he sprints it out. And last 100 yards, he sprints it out. He obviously he beats me. I let him win. And don't you know that little stinker? We roll into the house and he's like, hey mom, I smoked Dad today in the 5K.
So the first question that I have is, you ran a 5K, but he was having trouble with mile 1.
Yes.
Was he in metric terms or U.S. measurement terms? You don't run miles in a 5K, but that's
my gosh. No, so a 5K is 3.2 miles. So he's like killing it, in his mind. And so my point is like, he was not nearly as good as he thought he was. I'm going to tell you, the vast majority of sellers that are out there think their companies are way better than they really are. And that's, as you were talking about this, I thought about that story, because I can't tell you how many times, oh yeah, man, we just do this and we do that. And we got this many customers. And then you get under the hood and you're like, interesting. So that's pro tip number 1, is that whatever a seller tells you, just realize that, they're going to give you the absolute best, hopefully truthful side of the business. And so the due diligence is obviously going to back up what they say. And I'm not saying all owners are this way. I'm just going to say the vast majority.
By the way, some people who do what you're describing, they're not lying. They just have tremendous pride in their company.
Yeah.
They think that it's incredible. And
yes,
by the way, as an entrepreneur, if you have to wake up earlier every day than the guy who works at a big corporation and do all the things you do, you better think that your company is better than.
I'm not calling all of our sellers liars. I'm just simply making a point. That's probably going to be the story that you're going to get, right? You're going to get the most upside. Now, pro tip number 2, as you were talking, I was thinking about, let's talk about these little LOIs. So their letter of intent, I call them little LOIs. Be careful. I have seen LOIs used in ways of getting deals, and they get the owner excited, and because it's this massive number, and they don't really read the LOI. And the LOI is like, yes, it has
known as the headline number.
Yes, they give them the headline number. They get like, oh, that's my number. That's my number. This is great. This is what we're going to do. And then you start reading through that LOI, and there's all this thing that has to come out of diligence. And then, once it comes out of diligence, there's probably going to be some sort of earn out, or there's going to be you really have to pay attention.
Not always, but a lot.
Not always. My point here is that I've seen, I'm not saying whom or what, I have observed some companies use LOIs to lock down deals, and then they get them in diligence, or they get them in the details, and deal's probably not. The deal is comparable, in some cases, not as good some of the other deals that they had on the docket. So all I'm saying is that I'm not telling you if you get a good number that the deal's bad. I'm not saying it at all. I'm just simply making the point that when you get that LOI, read it. Like really read it.
So you just made a point that I was going to make later on in the discussion, but it's pretty subtle, and I'll do it now.
Okay.
Maybe the headline number is great and whatnot, and the firm that is purchasing. And by the way, this is not all purchasers. A lot of the Johnny come latelys to the industry. This is the problem, right? And
yes,
what you just described is, okay, I'm going to give you this great LOI, and we're going to go through diligence, and maybe the deal goes through, and maybe it doesn't, and maybe the terms are what you want, and maybe they're not. But there's this little thing at the end of every LOI called period of exclusivity. That means that if you sign that LOI for 90 or 120 or 6 months, you're not allowed to shop your deal because you're in diligence, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
essentially takes you off the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every deal that you do, every LOI that you do, you will have a period of exclusivity. The question, and it's not a bad thing, right? So in other words, if I'm going to buy your company, right, and I'm going to hire accountants and attorneys and all these other people to help me with my diligence, I need to have exclusivity, right? I don't want you out shopping the deal while I'm paying all these done. So it's not a bad thing. However, it's something that you need to watch, and a lot of these Johnny come latelys, just be careful.
Okay, so Dan is being super nice right now. If you're listening, I will tell you the raw data. The raw data is this: I get really frustrated with these Johnny come lately PE firms that get emails from all the freaking time, and they are like serious. They're looking for the Walmart special, right? They say, oh yeah, we're going to do this, and I mean legitimately, and I'm sure that our listeners are the same way. I get emails all the time. We're looking to get into the industry. We saw your company, blah blah blah. And what Dan just said is very much that game. I'm not claiming all. I mean, when I say this, I want to make sure folks, I don't mean every single, but it is out there, and you have to be careful, which is you got these PE firms who are not in the industry. They don't understand the industry. They heard that it's all hot. They want to jump in on the game. They have no idea what they're doing, but they know business per se, and sometimes that's even questionable. And so what they'll do is they'll give you, the promise of dreams, lock you down, and then may not come through on the deal. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is like they don't have the funding, or they get you in due diligence and they realize we don't really know, you know what I mean? And then it's super, super conservative. And so you're just doing all this extra crap. They don't know. They're basically, what you're doing is you're letting them learn on your time. And when you talk about this exclusivity thing, think about this. As a seller, someone locks you down for 90 days and you're not certain. Right. And then here you are wasting time with a bunch of Johnny come latelys. And so I'm just making.
So because of my role as a broker, I need to be very careful about how I describe some of these people, because there are some terrific PE firms.
They absolutely are. Yes.
And there are a bunch of guys who are just like you say. And so you need to be really, really careful. And don't be that, don't be enamored with, oh my gosh, I've had 5 letters this week, and some,
yes,
maybe it's from a reputable firm. By the way, I'm not saying that the guys who do this are not reputable. They just don't know the industry, right?
Right.
And I can tell you that I get on calls with these PE firms all the time, just so that I can explain the industry, and that
Yes.
maybe they want to enter, and maybe they don't. So,
right.
So what is due diligence? Due diligence is this letter of intent with all of the terms. They're checking it out. So if you give them a profit and loss statement, they're going to do due diligence on each of the line items to make sure that it is what you say it is, or operational. So let's talk about that. So who does due diligence? Is it only the big companies? Well, the strategics, everybody does it, and they do it differently, right? So the strategics, a lot of the strategics have in-house people who do the diligence, unless it's a really big deal that maybe they'll bring in an accounting firm or whatever. But they and they're pest people, so they understand it, right? Mm-hmm. The PE firms will bring in a large accounting firm with a bunch of 24-year-olds who don't understand the industry
and who never sleep,
right?
She'll get
Um,
emails from him at like 2 a.m.
Yep. And so that's, but they're doing their diligence as well. And listen, I'm a CPA and I started that way too. And it's not a bad way to go, right? You're verifying the data. It's just that if somebody who's experienced, like one of the strategics asks you a question, what they're asking. If somebody who doesn't know the answer, the industry asks you a question, you might not really understand what they're trying to get at, and it becomes frustrating. So, who does due diligence? And I have a question: only the big companies? No, everybody does it. But if you're looking to buy a company, even if it's a route or two, you need to do some diligence. So everybody needs to do diligence. Your diligence for that one or two route company may not be as stringent as, somebody who's buying a $10 million company.
Let me pause you there, because for our listeners, this is an important point that you're making. And I'm going to tell you again, a little pro tip. You may have a guy who says, I'm ready to retire. They've ran a route their entire life, and you try to do diligence on them. I mean, you might as well run through the woods looking for a specific leaf and trying to get it done. And so here's what you can do. I've done this in the past. When that has happened, basically what I let them do is a year-long earn out of whatever that business produces, because the fact is that it's probably going to waste more of your time, and the deal doesn't have enough money in it to just go nuclear on the diligence. So what you can do is you can set up like, look, here's what we're going to do. I can't, and again, I'm being very high level here. Dan's probably cringing as I'm saying this, but it is true. It is a pragmatic way of doing a small deal while still covering yourself from a security perspective.
So you're just talking about the financial and operational, but there's
Yes.
other things. So if you're going to buy that small company, some of the things that you might want to do is get an insurance loss run, like things that are non-financial, but
Correct.
you want to know whether this guy's reputable or not.
Yeah, my point here is that if you tell them, right, if you say, hey, look, we're going to give you X amount, I'm going to give it to you over a year, and we're going to do it as this business actually earns it, because I can't do the amount of diligence to give you a check up front, because I can't make light of it. And I will tell you, a lot of guys who know that they're running kind of loose will go for that. Like, they get it, right? It's not an uncommon thing to ask, to say, hey, look, of course they all want their money and they want to walk away, but no one's going to give them that, especially if they don't
one
keep
or
good
two
records.
route, one or two route business. Absolutely. That's the way I would buy it. But I wouldn't say I'm not going to do any diligence. Again, there's certain things that I want to know.
Yes. Agreed. Yep.
So, okay. So, who does diligence? Only the big companies? No, everybody should do diligence, whether you're a buyer, whether you're being purchased or whether you're purchasing. By the way, if you're a seller, if you should do a little diligence on the buyer. If you're going to sell to one of the strategics, them, they're good, right? But maybe some of these PE firms, like Donnie just said, don't have the money that they said, or maybe they're relying on bank financing and I've seen this, like, okay, we're going to buy this big company and whatnot, but it's dependent upon us getting financing.
Right. And they can't come through.
Yeah. So you as a seller need to do a little bit of diligence on the buyer. Again, if it's a strategic, you're good, right?
Right.
But if it's one of these Johnny come latelys, you want to know, right? Okay.
Right.
So why do due diligence? Because you're verifying the information that was given to you in order to make the offer. Okay. There's three streams. Actually, there's three major work streams in diligence. The first is legal, the second is operational, and the third is financial or quality of earnings. Okay. So let's talk about the three work streams. I am not a lawyer, but I have been around enough lawyers and stayed at a Holiday Inn last night. So let's talk about legal. So obviously, a lawyer is going to handle the contracts, but the lawyer, your lawyer, as the seller, your lawyer is going to help to answer questions or put together documents to make the thing happen. And the first one, which is really the big guys who do this, know this absolutely. But I don't know, Donnie, you've bought companies. Have you ever said, hey, listen, I want to see your articles of organization and make sure that you're registered with the state so that you actually own this company so that you have the right to sell it, right? That's one that a lot of small guys don't do. But that's one of the legal, one of the bullet points on the legal that you need to do, right? Do you?
So I have a few thoughts.
Go ahead.
Yes. I mean, so first of all, I would never, okay, I'm not that smart. I would never even think to do that. But I will tell you that I have attorneys who do. And that's the important part here. Yes. I mean, look, I will tell you this, like, attorneys drive me crazy. I can't stand them. Even like my attorney, we get to a point when his name is Rick, and I've been with him since I've started in business, and he doesn't do all of my stuff now. He'll outsource some of it, but he knows me, right? He knows that I'm going to get to a point where I'm tired of talking about it, and it's just like the details are done. Like I'm over it. So bringing it back to this question, yeah, you need to make sure you have an attorney who understands you and understands like your personality, because I will tell you, most entrepreneurs are not attorneys for a reason. They are completely and totally different skill sets. The second thing is that when you engage with an attorney, one of the biggest roles that you have as a buyer and as a seller is very clear direction with a very clear timeline. Because the fact is, if you don't set timelines and you don't make a clear direction, and you don't have a really good relationship with the buyer or the seller, depending on what side of the transaction you're on, these attorneys are going to kill the deal. Like, you have to watch them. You have to pay attention to them. Do not, because what's going to happen is that your attorney is going to say one thing. Well, then they're going to throw it over the fence. And then now the next attorney is going to be like, well, wait a minute. And they're going to, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're like, well, what happens in Tahiti if there's a full moon?
Well, that's the thing. Anytime an attorney says this is a theoretical argument, you tell him, I don't want any theoretical. What if the sky falls tomorrow?
Exactly.
Theoretical argument.
Yeah. So when we're talking about due diligence, of course, let attorneys do their job, but at the same time, you're in charge of the deal. Yeah, you're in charge of the deal, both from a buyer perspective and from a seller perspective. And there's been several times Rick's been like up in arms and saying, Donnie, this is risky. I'm like, okay, it's risky. I know, you've told me, we're moving on, right? It's perfectly okay. Do not let attorneys run the deal.
So remember, the buyer, this legal diligence, they're going to ask for a bunch of stuff. So that's the perspective I'm talking from right now. So I'm going to ask you, do you have is your corporation legit, or your LLC legit, that you have the legal right to transfer it to me? That's right. Very basic things. Mm-hmm. And so when they ask for that, and you say, geez, I haven't looked at my corporate book in 15 years. Well, you better have it in check, right?
Right.
Then the next thing that, and again, the lawyers will talk about the contracts afterwards, but this is just the diligence. Do you have any employment issues? Any employees who are suing you for harassment or whatever, right? Age discrimination, right? Is there any of that out there? Do you have any vehicle accidents that you're working on that could exceed your insurance limits? Are there any environmental or potential environmental issues that you have? These are legal diligence questions. And again, that's something that you work with your lawyer, or if we're representing you, we'll work with your lawyer, so that, because you've got to have a good understanding of the pest and lawn industry.
Well, there's an important point I want to make here, and I'm going to do what Dan does. I'm going to put out the disclaimer here up front, which is, most of the time when you do a deal, you can pretty much firewall, this is prior to the deal, this is after the deal. But having said that, if you're a large company and you have big pockets and you purchase a company, and all of a sudden now you're involved, like, you just want to walk away from employment issues like lawsuits, vehicle lawsuits, like those types of things, like, you want to be careful, because why would you walk into that? Even if you quote unquote firewall yourself, like, I just would be careful in that regard. And so this is exactly why you want to do the legal, because you don't want to insert yourself into something that, even though you may have done a deal a little bit later on, now that company belongs to you. And, again, you don't want to touch it. So, okay.
Next work stream is operational. So this is one that's interesting, right? That we see that mainly the strategics are really, really big on this, right? And it's kind of interesting, me being an accountant or being a CPA and working on deals for many years, and in a prior life working on deals. it was always the financials, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that the strategics and the savvy PE guys will do is they'll spend a lot of time on HR. And I don't mean what we were just talking about. It's like, okay, who are all your teammates? Do they have the potential to move forward in their careers? Are they going to stay? Are they going to be pissed off if this deal goes and crater the thing? What are the potential? What's the potential that I have for these people? Do we want to offer them stay bonuses and things like that? Okay, so operational, there's a lot of time spent on the teammates, right? Also, what are your benefits? Are your benefits as good as ours? Are they better? If they are, then that's going to be a problem when you come over. If they're not as good, well, that's going to be a plus for your employees that come over because they're going to get better benefits. Is their compensation reasonable? I can tell you that a lot of small guys, in order to keep their heads from exploding, they have a technician who's probably well overpaid, who they could just throw stuff at. Things happen. But if that guy's well overpaid and he's going to go into a larger entity that has many more technicians, there's got to be some parity, right? So they want to understand reasonableness of compensation, or maybe you're underpaying compared to the market, and when they value your company, it's a multiple of this EBITDA or this cash flow to owner, but maybe I have to rework that because your guys aren't making enough, and I've got to bring them into parity.
So let me pause there because it's a really important point for those that are listening. The reason this is such a big deal is at the end of the day, what brings value to your business is your revenue stream. And so the strategics and the really good PEs understand if they buy you and everyone heads for the exits, that revenue stream is going to have a big impact. And what they thought they were buying, now the value is going to go down. The other part of this is that it's so difficult. It's so difficult to find talent. This is kind of part of the deal. It's whoever they're buying. They want to make sure that and I will tell you, not to get too far off the ranch here, but I'm really interested to see what happens with Aptiv. With David leaving, it's, because he's been a driver behind that whole model for many, many years. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to recover with him gone.
They didn't buy the entire thing, and some of the management is in place, so it'll be very interesting.
Yeah,
we're going to try to get David on the podcast, so we'll see.
Anyway, I don't want to go down that road. Point is that yes, the idea is that HR is a really big deal because at the end of the day, when they purchase or you sell or whatever, the idea is that it keeps going. Like what you have now continues. That's really what we're trying to figure out. So.
And for all of those listeners who are door-to-door companies, that's a difficult one for a non-door-to-door company or a company who's going to buy you who doesn't have the contacts that you do to make door-to-door work on a go-forward basis. What else goes into operational? Service protocols. You offer monthly and we offer quarterly, or you offer quarterly and we offer 3 times a year. How does that work, right? So they want to understand that. Office protocols, who's doing what in the office, right? Are you overstaffed in the office? Or are you understaffed in the office? Does your wife or husband do a bunch of bookkeeping and both of you are leaving the business, right? So they want to know those kinds of things, right? So what they're trying to do is what you're trying to do is determine if this company jars loose from its current ownership, can it sustain itself with or without the owner, right? Or do some of those tasks have to be replaced? So that's what you're trying to do in the operational. So the third work stream, and this is my favorite because it's financial.
Oh my gosh, I wonder why.
So a lot of times it's called quality of earnings or Q of E. So if you say that your company's doing $5 million, what I want to do is I want to look in your CRM and see, okay, you're doing $5 million according to the CRM. But then I want to take that $5 million and I want to tie it into your QuickBooks or whatever general ledger system you're using. Then what I want to do is I want to tie it from QuickBooks to your bank statements, right? So I want to really, really understand the cash flow, right? So it's called a proof of cash. So a lot of times they'll ask for a year or maybe more of bank statements statements and just kind of prove it right through the whole CRM process and through your closing process. And if you don't have tight accounting controls, this becomes a bit of a hot mess, right? And so that's important. Okay. The next thing is proof of revenues. Just because I do $5 million, maybe I did one $5 million job and it was a bird job, right? Or maybe I did a whole bunch of one-time work. So what I want to do is break down. I want to understand the quality of the revenue, right? I want to break down through your CRM how much of that is recurring or profitable recurring versus non-profitable recurring. So in other words, residential monthlies, for the most part, are not really good things to do. There are some.
Hang on. I got one thing to say here because I've had this happen in a deal. Pay attention to what he just said about proof of revenues. We did a deal many years ago with a door-to-door company, and we made a high margin where like an earn out, just because, like Dan said, we are not a door-to-door company. We were purchasing a door-to-door company, and I was a little nervous. That turned out to save our bacon because we had, quote unquote, all these customer accounts that were making a ton of revenue, but they were on quote unquote win back program, which basically meant about 10 to 15% of the revenue was not actually revenue. Like it was showing as revenue, but they were not actually being collected. By the way, this is not me digging on a win back company. Yeah, it was the win back. So basically the win back is that you don't pay us, but we're going to show you as a paying customer. And
because you left, and we're going to say, hey, we're going to win you back, so we're going to do your work for free.
Yeah.
Well, you book it as revenue and then you write it off. So
that's what was, I guess my point is like pay attention to stuff like that. And again, I am not hating on door-to-door companies. There's a lot of great of them.
Not at all. We love them.
And yeah, I'm just letting you know, like this is something you got to pay attention to, because tying revenue to cash, like what's actually going in the bank, that's a big deal. And even though it may look like revenue, in the case Dan actually did this deal with me, and he knows we're not going to name names. He knows exactly who I'm talking about. We put a very high, I mean, me and Dan actually talked about this. We put a very high earnout percentage in, and they ate up every bit of it because we had to get rid of all these win back accounts. And so just things to pay attention to. That's all. So that was actually a compliment, Dan. Very few times that I will compliment Dan.
I appreciate that.
Yes.
It's a compliment.
Okay, back to the beatdowns. Keep going.
So proof of revenues, like again, we always hear, oh, well, recurring is much better than non-recurring. Well, if you have a bunch of recurring monthly residential accounts, for the most part, those are not that profitable, right? Quarterlies, 3 times a year, those are profitable, right? And so you need to understand, well, okay, just because it's recurring, what's the recurrence pattern and what's the dollar per hour? So it's not just proof of cash, because maybe I have, this $5 million company and it's all one-time work, or maybe it's, 2 jobs at $2.5 million or what, right? But the revenue breakdown, right? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to do recurring versus non-recurring, but also there's something called customer concentration risk. In other words, if 40% of your company is this one massive customer,
especially in commercial.
And if you lose it, 40% of the revenue goes away. That's also a problem, right? So, and again, when I say it's a problem, it's something to be worked around. It can be worked around through representations, warranties, and indemnities, right? Okay.
Well, but the reality of it is, this is the kind of crap that comes up in due diligence. Like everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it's all great," and then you get under the hood, and then it's like this is where we start, quote unquote, making the sausage.
So one of the things lawn care has really, the valuations have come up in lawn care, but years ago, okay, so I have a bunch of 3 times a year pest control and a bunch of lawn care, which is more valuable, right? So those are the kinds of questions that come up. Okay. Right. So the next thing is most bigger deals or more sophisticated deals work with something called a working capital peg or an accounts receivable peg, which basically means I'm buying your company as a whole, right? So I'm going to take your accounts receivable. In some cases, I'll take your accounts payable. But essentially, what it's saying is that in order to keep the business going, I can't just remove the receivables. I need to have those receivables. So what would be a great way for me to reduce those receivables? We peg them, but if I didn't peg them, if I were buying your company and you had $200,000 worth of receivables and you're going to give them over to me and there's no peg on it, What would you do? You try to collect them. And in order to collect them, what would you do? You call every customer and say, hey, give me 50 cents on the dollar and we'll write the other 50 cents off. And then you present the company with no receivables, right? So the buyer always wants to have a peg on these accounts receivable. It's extremely important. Okay. Let's see. Margins. We want to look at gross margins. We want to look at net margins. We want to understand what your marketing spend is, what your return is. Those are all those kinds of things. And I'll tell you one thing that's always been part of the diligence process, but the last 2 years, everybody's just hammering it because of the uncertainty of the economy, the uncertainty of, you know, just there's so many more players now, and you know, it's a much different marketplace than it was a few years. But this major one is attrition, and a lot of companies calculate it differently. The way to calculate it with full transparency is to do a waterfall. So basically, what a waterfall is okay, in 2017, I sold 1,000 accounts and I lost 100. At the end of 2017, I have 900 accounts. 2018, I lost another 150 accounts from that 1,000 bucket. So now I have 250 left. And each year you do a waterfall or the attrition from that year, right? So so how many accounts do I have left today from 5 years ago? That's going to give you the most transparency. And it's also going to give you an estimate of the lifetime or the life of a customer. And a lot of these valuations are based on life of a customer, right? So when you hear a company that's 2 years old that out of the gate is, you know, doing $3 million because they just went, you know, crazy with marketing and whether door to door or not, that company is going to be looked on. The valuation is not going to be as high because those are new customers. We don't know what the time of a customer is.
Let me just translate what you said, because I want to make sure our listeners. So in the past, it's been revenue, EBITDA. Now what Dan is saying, it also is your cancel rate and how long you've had customers on the books. So
it's always been that way, but it's much
right.
More.
Exactly. Yeah. I guess the point of it is that you look at the equation that has a much more prominent effect on the price and getting through diligence. So, all right, let's wrap up here on financial. What else is really important?
See, most deals are done what they call cash-free, debt-free. So basically, you keep all the cash in the bank, and then you pay off all the loans on vehicles and deliver them free and clear. That's but there are, you know, you have to verify those liabilities because usually those will get paid off at closing. The other liability that a lot of people don't think about, and it is a liability, are customer deposits. If you take money up front, that's unserviced liability. And so if you stop doing business today, you'd owe the customer that money. The buyer wants to be compensated for that. And so that is a big deal that most people don't.
So if you do credit card billing at the beginning of the month, it's something to think about. Yeah, because you're going to have negative net receivables if you're doing it. Just realize that's going to be not
all the good stuff that we tell you how to run your business could come back a little bit,
or do your deal on the 30th,
right? And so, you know, there's many other issues, but those are some of the things that you want to think about. Whether you're a seller, right, or whether you want to buy a company. And if you want to buy a small company, you don't have to go and do all the things that we discussed today, but there's a few of them that you should. And so, you know, obviously, if you're ever thinking about this and you want some help, you know, just email me, dan@pcobookkeepers.com. That's my cheap plug for what we
do. It's okay. It's not as bad as some in the past have been. But I will just say, you know, if you're listening to this and you're kind of thinking about this a little bit down the road, this is like buying a house, right? I mean, you know, except it's like a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And while you don't need to understand every single detail, you do need to understand the process and you need to understand the pitfalls. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do in this episode is like, this is what the process looks like. Here's some things to look at. Here's some things to make sure that you got tight. And here's what to expect. Obviously, if you go down this road, you're going to need to use, I'm just saying, you really should use a broker, someone who understands you, can represent you if you're on the seller side. And same thing if you're on the buyer side, just making sure that, you know, whatever it is, because I will tell you, my attorney, Rick, that I talked about earlier, he says this all the time. He goes, I've seen politicians and I've seen snakes. He says, but boy, I have met some really slick business guys. That's coming from an attorney. So
right. If you're not smart enough to be in business, you go into politics. So
yeah. So my point is that, this is something obviously for a lot of us is our livelihoods. And you want to make sure that, number one, when you go through the process, you're riding shotgun with someone who's been through it before and who has your best interest at heart. Because I can tell you, there's a lot of times when you'll have someone there, your best buds, and we're going to do this deal. And then you get in a deal and all of a sudden you realize they're leveraging the relationship to maybe make you make some concessions that you probably shouldn't make. And so with that, Dan, anything else to add before we finish out here?
I think that's it.
All righty. Just a reminder that all the resources and topics that we talked about today are going to be available on the podcast website, pmpindustryinsider.com. Just take a look under show notes. And I'm not certain when this episode is going to air, if it's in the past, if it's in the future, if it's right now, who knows?
Definitely not in the past.
Yeah. Well, the point is that the second half of my announcement, which is we're both going to be at PestWorld. I'm excited about meeting everyone, coming out and seeing everyone. I think Dan is going to do some blackjack thing. Who knows? I don't know. I'm sure he'll be over there with a bottle of whiskey and shysting people. I'm just kidding. I don't think he'll be doing that. But in any case,
shysting, but definitely whiskey if you win the or booth number 601.
Yes. So looking forward to the show. Looking forward to seeing everyone. If you see me, please come up and shake my hand. If I see you, I will do the same. And with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
See ya.
All right now.